Good evening. Thanks for tuning in to our online Bible study of the book of Matthew. And I know that we might be picking up new people every week, and we're glad that you did tune in. If you are new to this study, this is Nick Westberg and Curtis Pittman and I, Cliff Sabro. We're here, part of the Westside Side Church of Christ, and our goal is to break down the book of Matthew in a way that's easy for us to understand, because we're not the smartest people in the world, but we're enjoying the study and have participation from the audience. You can leave comments. And then remember, we talk about our discussion in a Zoom class on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. But we'll get right into the text. We are in the book of Matthew, and one of the points that we've been trying to emphasize every week is that there's a continuity of theme throughout this book. It's not designed to just be a standalone, verse-by-verse kind of idea. The Bible's meant to be looked at as part of a whole unit, and the book of Matthew furthers a purpose. Nick, how would you describe that purpose of the book of Matthew? Like I asked you last week, it's quiz time.
This is quiz time, yeah. Matthew 5:20, we've said it every week, and I'll say it again because I say we said it every week, but that your righteousness was to supersede or to be better than that of the scribes and the Pharisees.
That's a trick question. That's the purpose of the Sermon on the Mount.
Not the
right. Book. What's the purpose of the book?
The purpose of the book is to prove to the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah.
Yes.
So now we're in chapter 8. I almost forgot.
Yeah, we're out of the
We're not in chapter 7 anymore. I was thinking.
Yeah. We're out of the Sermon on the Mount, which we were for about a month in the Sermon on the Mount. So we're continuing in the book of Matthew, which the purpose of the book of Matthew is to prove to the Jews that Jesus is the promised Messiah. And he's going to show that through, the miracles, through the fulfillment of prophecy, through the signs he performs, and for the fact, like in the end of the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus is an amazing, authoritative teacher. And I want us to begin here today with the last verse of chapter 29, or last two verses, because I think it segues into this discussion. So Jesus has just preached probably the most magnificent sermon in the history of mankind, the Sermon on the Mount. And after he preaches this sermon, the crowds, according to verse 28 of Matthew chapter 7, are amazed at his teaching. Verse 29, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as their scribes. Something special is about Jesus, and he's going to continue into chapter 8 and showing us how special he is. Any thoughts on that idea of him being this authoritative teacher before we go into chapter 8?
I think it ties into the themes that Matthew uses throughout the book to prove that Jesus is the Messiah. So he hits the fact that Jesus is a master teacher. And the Sermon on the Mount is the best example of the fact that Jesus is the master teacher. He has that authority. But he also ties into, and he segues here into chapter 8 and chapter 9, are the miracles that Jesus has. To where not only his authority is with the words that he teaches, but the deeds that he does or is able to do in the miracles.
Well, so basically he can back up. He puts his money where his mouth is kind of idea. He doesn't just talk a big game. He can prove it.
Deliver.
So they looked at his lesson and they're like, wow, this guy, there's something special about him. He has power or authority, same Greek word. And now let's see if that power and authority that we see demonstrated in his teaching is manifested in other parts of his life. I was reading an article today about a pretty well-known speaker in Christianity. I won't reveal his name, but the person recently had some big scandals. And it was talking about how so many people put their faith in this person, and then ultimately his lifestyle didn't back it up. And Jesus' lifestyle, his ability, confirms his authoritative teaching. He doesn't just say, listen to me because I'm telling you. He says, here's why I'm going to prove it to you. And I think that authority idea is so important because the Jews were looking for an authority figure. They were used to authority figures. Well, here's the ultimate authority figure, and it's the Son of God. So he taught with authority, and now he's going to confirm or manifest that authority. So let's read. Chapter 8 in verse 1. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. And we'll stop right there for a second, too. Matthew does emphasize crowd size. He wants us to notice that Jesus is popular, that people are noticing him. Nick, we just came from a gathering there in the parking lot at Winco. A bunch of church members got together and are eating Sonic in front of Winco. And there's a whole bunch of people there. And it shows that there's something special about what we're doing because there was a crowd size. Yeah. People were driving by looking, probably making sure we were social distancing. But they're like, hey, all of a sudden there's all these people here. And they're eating all this ice cream. They're being nice to one another. Why is this crowd here? We're drawn to a crowd. Yeah. I remember being in school. You remember when a fight broke out on the playground? All of a sudden, there's a crowd over there, and you run because you want to see. So large crowds are following
Everybody
Jesus.
circles around.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But instead of yelling fight, 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 they're yelling miracle, miracle. So large crowds followed him. And a leper came to him and bowed down before him. And that's our worship term, actually, proskuneo, I believe there.
Mhm.
So this man with leprosy, which was a horrible disease, makes your body parts fall off, it's pretty disgusting, comes to him and bows down, worships him, and says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. So this leper acknowledges already right off the bat something about Jesus.
Yeah. Something that the Pharisees are not willing to acknowledge about Jesus, right? Something that they're going to take offense to when Jesus Jesus comes in and he's teaching as one who had authority. Well, they're offended by that type of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if somebody came in and they just started teaching, what gives you the right to talk like that? Well, these people understand who Jesus is. He says, Lord, right? He calls him master. He calls him Kyrios, master, if you will.
And he bows down, too.
Yes, yeah.
So you got a man who probably would have been looked at as an outcast inside, because if he had a disease, a lot of times people say, you did something wrong.
Right.
But now this guy, before this, the only one I can think of that's showing homage to Jesus is John the Baptist, really.
Right.
With him, kind of worshiping him. But now you got a man with leprosy doing it.
Right. And Matthew doesn't cover the details of,
No.
maybe what happened in between all this and what Jesus did. But obviously, he's done something to where people are going, I got to go to that guy because he has something that can make me well.
So he comes to Jesus and says, Lord, if you are willing, that thy will be done idea, ultimately it's Jesus' will, you can make me clean. And then, I know I've mentioned this in sermons before, but I love this imagery. Verse 3, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Jesus here already is showing his power, first off, over disease.
Yeah.
He's able to get rid of the leprosy out of him, but also, just as a subnote, it's always stood out to me the compassion here. The fact that he touched this man with leprosy. I don't know about you. I mean, we got social distancing going on. We're not supposed to touch one another. You didn't touch somebody back then with leprosy.
Yeah.
He touched him. He was willing to do that.
Well, and there's so much. I mean, obviously with Jesus, there's miraculous power with physical touch. But even now, it's something that I was talking to someone at work today. The difference in not being able to shake someone's hand.
It feels weird.
Yeah,
I'm missing something.
There's connection in touch, and this, to your point, this leper has gone how many years potentially without someone touching him physically?
Yeah.
And here Jesus touches him.
Yeah, I wonder what spoke more to him. Obviously, being cleansed was a big deal, but you touched me too. Human contact. Someone cares about. Doesn't view me as a diseased outcast. They view me as a human being. And he shows compassion. He touches him.
Another thing I want to point out is this man's faith,
Mm-hmm.
because in the following verses we're going to see that it was faith that healed these people that are being healed. But there's a connector here between this verse. He says, "If you will," right? He knows, he has faith. He knows that Jesus can do something. He knows that Jesus is his master, his Lord, and his faith was what allowed him to be in the position that he was in when he said that to Jesus.
Oh yeah, he trusted his will and his authority. If you are willing, and Jesus says, "I am willing."
And I think that's an important word to point out too. Trusting.
Yeah.
That it is about it's not this just fairy tale believing. It's that this man actually trusts what Jesus can do, and he believes in the power and the authority Jesus has to heal his disease.
And when you come to Jesus asking him, if you will, a lot of times he is willing. And I think that's a beautiful.
Are you willing?
Yeah, and that faith aspect's a neat point because especially in the next section with the centurion, we see Jesus even mention his faith. And so here we have at least two individuals, which we'll again get to the centurion here in a minute, that exhibit a lot of faith when there may not necessarily be anything that we see that prompts them to have that faith.
Right. Other than that, they are Jewish people, and they do,
We don't know what the leper is here, though, right? I mean, we assume because he goes, well, I guess you're right, because he has to show himself to the priest.
Yeah,
he's Jewish.
And so, that's
I take that
obviously,
back.
But then the centurion, that's obvious. He works for the Roman government. It's obvious that he's not a Jew, but yet he may have been what they call like a proselyte or something, where he did worship God in the manner that Jews did, but other than that, we would know him.
Let's look at that one here in a second.
Yeah.
It's funny, as a preacher, and I notice certain things right here. I have a 3-point sermon that just popped out to me about the leper here. Come to Jesus, worship Jesus, trust Jesus, be blessed by Jesus. There's a free sermon for you guys. Well, no, the final one was the final point was the conclusion.
Oh, I'm with
Yeah,
you.
that was the conclusion. Okay.
Yeah.
So the leprous man comes to Jesus. He came to Jesus. He bowed down before Jesus. He trusted in Jesus and was blessed by Jesus. Amen. All right.
Amen.
So then, in verse 4, and Jesus said to him, though, something odd happens now.
Yeah.
Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go, show yourself to the priest, and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. See how this huge miracle takes place, and you think, all right, go spread the news of Jesus, and Jesus says, don't tell anybody.
Which, real quick, we'll circle back, but you had asked a question on if that was in the Old Testament. It's in Leviticus chapter 14 and 15. It is where it's described in the Levitical law on presenting yourself to the priest to show that you have been cleansed.
So there's a law that when you somehow get over the leprosy, you need to kind of have a medical inspection to get signed off. You know what I mean? That you got the antibodies now or something, right?
Exactly.
You know. So so the law was go show yourself to a priest and offer an offering, and then you can go on life. So the man is cleansed, and Jesus does tell him to fulfill the law of Moses' requirements because Jesus followed the old law. But that first part about don't tell anybody, it's odd, and it happens throughout the book of Matthew and in the other Gospels too, where Jesus kind of sometimes he tells people to tell, and other times he tells people not to. So here's the big question: why? I believe historically this is called the messianic secret. You know what I mean? People have been debating it, theologians, for years. But why do you think Jesus says, don't tell anybody? This is theory time. I'm not going to say you're wrong. Okay?
Theory time.
Just theory time.
Well, it's hard to say because at the time, this is probably, I guess I would say that this is the first miracle that we see Jesus perform, is the healing of the leper. I can't think of anything before.
At least in
chapter 5.
Matthew, yeah.
At least in Matthew, this is the first time that we see him heal somebody. Not that he hasn't done it before, but in Matthew, he says, this is the first time that we see him. So see that you say nothing to anyone. If this is early in his ministry, he's already got large crowds of people following him. That could be one angle of it. The other angle could be that he doesn't want attention from the religious leaders pushing his time, not that it would happen, but pushing his time up further than it would be. Could be, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure, but...
All right, well, Curtis Pittman, what's your theory?
I mean, I had always been taught or heard that it's one of those things that when you're told not to do something, you immediately go out and do it.
Yeah.
And so when he says, don't go telling anybody, this is something to tell.
So maybe it's kind of a backhanded viral marketing strategy here? I don't know. I lean toward that there's a certain timetable that things have to happen, and Jesus is orchestrating maybe certain events in certain ways to make that timetable happen, whether it be going to the cross or something like that.
But what he says after that, I think, is pretty keen to who he is going to tell. He's not gonna tell somebody. He's gonna go show himself to a priest in the temple. Look, my leprosy is healed.
Application number 5 of my new sermon: show the world how Jesus has changed your life. There you go. So he's supposed to show the religious leaders though here, and maybe the word will get out that way.
And I mean, I'm good just shooting from the hip, but he's showing the priest. The message is going to the Jews.
Yeah.
So Jesus has power over these external diseases like leprosy, and he backs up his teaching. And then we go on and we have another example of Jesus' great authority. Verse 5, when Jesus entered into Capernaum, a centurion came to him imploring him. Now, a centurion would be a Roman soldier over 100 people, right? Came to him imploring him and saying, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. Now, let's back up for a second. What do we know about centurions?
They're Roman
commanders,
right?
Not Jewish people, not necessarily, they're not normally following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're not familiar with the Bible.
No, they're not. And that's why this is kind of an odd account, because you would expect Matthew writing to Jews to be proving to Jewish people. Of course, at the time when Matthew writes this, Jews and Gentiles are intermixed, in
society, but they don't get along.
Well, but they're intermingled with Christians are intermingled, Jews and Gentiles.
And Matthew is predominantly showing the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah, but he also calls out there's this thread
Right.
of building this case for the Gentiles, going all the way back to chapter 1 with the lineage of Jesus and the Gentile women
Yes.
that are included. In chapter 2, he emphasizes the Gentiles. In chapter 4, he emphasizes the Gentiles here. In verse 11, he's going to explicitly
Right.
emphasize the Gentiles.
Well, I think he's kind of tickling the ears of the Jews, not in a negative way, but they, in the Old Testament even, in prophecies, there's hints that all people will follow, but Jeremiah 31 and all that.
Right.
So they also knew in the back of their mind that the Messiah was supposed to reach all people.
And going back to the promise to Abraham.
Yeah.
What was that promise?
Pre,
Right.
Israel and all that.
Pre-Israel, yeah.
And so now you have a Roman Gentile here, a centurion, coming to Jesus and saying, Lord, my servant is paralyzed. He's fearfully tormented. Come heal him, right? Jesus says, I will come and heal him. Then verse 8, the centurion shows his faith. Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. So the leper got touched, but the Roman centurion says, hey, you can just go, be healed, and he's going to be healed.
Well, and I don't know what Jesus' calendar looked like, but for him to clear it and say, I'll come with you and heal him, shows, again, the compassion that Jesus has for those who come to him.
Yeah. Do we take the time when someone has an immediate need and they call upon us to drop everything and help them?
Yeah.
So often our Christianity's on our convenient schedule.
Sure.
And I'm guilty of this. If I get that late night text or that early morning phone call, I'm like, oh, why'd they do it now? Why can't they wait till I'm in the office? And it's usually Curtis early morning and Nick late at night. But I mean, a lot of times I'm like, okay, no, these are people. Curtis and Nick need Jesus too, but no. But I mean, really, we need to be people that are willing to drop everything and help others.
Yeah.
Jesus did that here.
I want to kind of back up too, because of course we got the leper, but then we got a paralyzed man, and not that this would be something like when you think of paralyzed, you think automatically, in my mind, at least this is where I go, that something bad happened in order to put that someone in the position of paralyzed. But when you start thinking outside of that, you go, okay, what kinds of diseases cause that type of paralysis, right? So it was probably a prolonged sickness that brought him to this point in his life where, okay, now my servant is lying sick.
He could have fallen and broken his leg.
He could. See? But I mean, Matthew's not a doctor, and you know what? Their term for paralyzed could be covering a wide array of medical conditions, from muscular dystrophy to falling off the ladder. Okay,
I don't know. All I know is that this isn't something that happens suddenly. The centurion hears what Jesus is doing, and he comes to Jesus because he knows what Jesus.
What about the fact too that the centurion cares enough about his servant?
I was debating on even mentioning that, because that's an example for us as leaders, whether in our home, in our church, at our workplace, to take care over the ones that are in our charge. I mean, I just had the comment at work today that if we take care of our employees will take care of the product, which the product will then take care of our customers, which will then keep us sustainable. And so our focus needs to be on the ones that we can help that are under our charge. Yeah. And we see that here with the centurion. He had how many people under his charge, yet he's concerned about his servant at home.
And Jesus is going to compliment him for his faith, but his faith isn't just in the fact that he calls Jesus Lord, but how he treats his servant. Let's read, though. The centurion makes a statement in verse 9. He says, I also notice, am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. Now when Jesus heard this, he was marveled, and said to those who were following, truly I say to you, I have not found so great faith with anyone in Israel. So this man makes this statement, first off, about his position. He says, I'm under authority, but I also have soldiers under me, and he's a boss.
So powerful.
He can do lots of things. But even this man, who's in a position of power, recognizes the greater power of Jesus.
Yes.
And, you think about so often people that are in those positions of authority, it goes to their head, right? I mean, you get somebody, absolute power corrupts absolute, and all that. Little power can be a drug and all that. Here, he has authority, but he still acknowledges the authority of Jesus.
Right. And that just goes to show you the character of the centurion, too. The individual that he is. Like, he understands the position that, like you said, I don't repeat what you said, but he understands Jesus' position of power. Come and go are two things, somebody in power would say to someone in a lower, and they would do it, especially like to think about his slave.
But he doesn't tell Jesus to do it. He asks.
No,
Yeah.
he asks. He says, I know what you do
Yeah.
because I do the same thing. And I know when you say this is going to happen,
It will happen.
it will happen. Yeah.
And in my
That's
mind,
so
kind of, I picture this dialogue, and this is just how I see it. This is kind of like a transition time. He's healed the leper, and I feel like Jesus is on the move.
Yeah.
And the centurion comes up to him, and there's a crowd of people as Jesus is talking, and they're having this conversation, but other people are observing this conversation. And Jesus stops and then addresses the crowd.
Yeah.
And he says to those that are following, so now he's not talking to the man, verse 10, he's talking to the crowd. Truly I say to you, so he's telling everybody, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. So maybe everybody's already thinking, oh, the centurion's talking to Jesus. How dare he? How dare this Gentile, this Roman soldier talk to the Messiah? You know, he's a dirty, rotten scoundrel. And they're kind of maybe thinking these thoughts. And Jesus goes, by the way, this guy has more faith than anybody in Israel. And then he makes a statement in verse 11. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and from recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast into the outer darkness, and in that place there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Jesus kind of has a drop everything and preach it moment. Yeah. And so he tells the crowds that, by the way, this guy's got more faith than any Hebrew, any Israelite, because he's trusting in me. And also, there's going to be a day when people from the east and west, which would be non-Jews, are going to come to the kingdom of heaven, and they're going to get to hang out for eternity with the great pillars of faith in Israel. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Jews thought that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob gave them a pass into heaven. That's their grandfathers. Jesus says they're going to get to eat with them too. They're going to get to be with them.
And not only that, there's going to be those in the kingdom, those Jewish people, the sons of the kingdom, that are just not, they're not even going to be in the same room. They're going to be cast out into the outer darkness.
Yeah.
So you got two options. You got there's going to be Gentile converts who are going to get to have the blessings of a child of Israel. And there's going to be children of Israel who don't get the blessings because they're going to be rejected. And he mentions there's going to be a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, which doesn't sound nice.
No. And well, not to back up on you a little bit, but that last statement he says in verse 10, for I have, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. Mm-hmm. That's completely and utterly powerful because the people standing around who are hearing Jesus talk to this Gentile man are going, well, what do you mean, Jesus?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
And they're not all bad.
No,
either.
But like, what do you mean? Like, he has the faith to say, no. Look, you don't have to come with me. You're not worthy to come under my, I'm not worthy to have you under my roof. Just say the word.
So his humility made him greater than any Israelite.
And that resulted in
his
Jesus,
trust.
And Jesus was marveled as a result. And how difficult would it be to make Jesus marvel?
There you go. Another sermon. Does Jesus marvel at you? Yeah. Make a faith that's so amazing that even Jesus, catches his attention. So there's going to be people, Jesus says, that are going to be lost and they're going to be saved. He mentions kingdom of heaven, and there's kind of we've already had allusions to that in the Sermon on the Mount. But then you also have the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, outer darkness, punishment. Right. We can talk about hell and things like that in another time. But the idea is, some of the people you least expect to enjoy the blessings of heaven are the ones that are going to get it. And some of the people that most would expect, like these religious leaders, the sons of the kingdom, the Jews, they're not going to get it.
And tie that back to what Matthew brought up on the Sermon on the Mount, that there will be someone that day that say to me, Lord, Lord. And the response, Jesus' response will be, depart from me, I never knew you. Yeah. There's going to be, we have that mentality at times where we are unwilling to see that other people might be going the same direction that we are, where we want to have the same attitude of the Jews and not accept the fact that there might be others with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
That right mentality. Yeah. We're right, and everybody else is wrong. And
as a result, we get a beam sticking out of
and that's what I think Jesus is pointing out here. He's saying, look, like, just because you are an Israelite doesn't mean you're going to get the promise of an Israelite.
And just because you go to church doesn't mean you're going to heaven.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And Jesus said, verse 13 to the centurion, go, and it shall be done for you as you have believed, or you had faith. There's that word again. And the servant was healed at that very moment. So Jesus never actually goes to his house either. Yeah. So after this conversation, after he rebukes the crowds and corrects them all about eternity, he goes, yeah, you go home and your servant's healed. and he's healed, and it works out. And I think that's just amazing. The power of Jesus. He has power over the location of the miracle. It doesn't have to happen in a certain place. He can will it from afar and bring idea for prayer. I mean, he can answer prayers from anywhere.
Sure.
Also shows that God isn't partial, which I think is a good lesson for us here too.
Yeah.
I mean, just sermon after sermon after sermon.
I think we've
you
been
got
preaching
your next few weeks there.
Yeah.
Lined up. Yeah.
Well, any comments about the centurion or the leper being healed so far?
Man,
not
it's
the
just-
centurion wasn't healed, but the servant.
Both these examples are just so incredibly powerful, and I can't help but think about but trying to put myself in the shoes of these individuals too, and saying, what if do I have the amount of faith the centurion has? Do I have the amount of faith that the leper has?
Yeah.
Could I really sit there and go, I trust Jesus enough to do something like that? Does anybody have that much faith?
Yeah, and we can learn so much from their trust, their humility.
Well, it's like when we talked about in Matthew chapter 4, where Jesus calls these young men. He says, "Come and follow me." And you said, "I don't know if I don't know if I could do it." I can you truthfully say that that's the type of mentality that you have coming into a situation?
Not
like
always.
This?
I'm not always willing to ask for help.
Right.
I'm not always willing to admit that I don't have it all figured out.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to always submit to other people's authority. But the centurion did. The leper did. They trusted and they were blessed for it.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that too, Curtis?
No, I was going to segue into the reaction for the next miracle.
Yeah.
And Peter's mother-in-law's reaction. You talk about maybe not having the faith. What is our reaction when Jesus does something great for us?
Yeah.
Do we have the reaction? Do we have the faith of the centurion? Do we have the faith of the leper? And do we have the reaction of Peter's mother?
Yeah.
Another 3-point sermon. The faith of the leper, the humility of the centurion, and the reaction of the mother-in-law.
There you have it, folks.
All right.
Next sermon series.
So
14.
we'll put this through here. Jesus ends the Sermon on the Mount. They acknowledge that he's teaching with authority. And now, boom, 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 we're seeing all these miracles that confirm that authority. He can back up his teaching. We're going to see it again here, Matthew 8, verse 14. When Jesus came into Peter's home, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick in bed with a fever. By the way, that means that Peter, if he has a mother-in-law, what?
Married.
He's married, okay? Just random thought, because sometimes these apostles came from different backgrounds and walks of life. So he comes into Peter's house, and he has a mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law is sick in bed with a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and waited on him. Now, every time my mother-in-law's sick, I remind her of this, and when she gets well, she has a responsibility. Zinni, if you're listening to that. But no, Jesus, again, another amazing miracle where here you got a lady who's got a fever, and he touches her hand, and the fever leaves her.
And that's the crazy part is it's not even like, it's Jesus touches her hand.
Yeah. Go on, here we go.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you do? I mean, it's a natural reaction for a lot of people, right? Your grandma or grandpa's sick, you go in the hospital. What do? Well, you sit by their bed,
hold their
hand.
Yeah.
And so put that in perspective with what Jesus is doing
Yeah.
here. It could be, I don't know what their customs were at that particular time, but that's the image we could probably pull into 21st century Christianity.
And the neat thing, at the beginning here, chapter 8, we see an external illness.
Right.
You can see the leprosy. You can see the impact of that. But
Right.
here she has a fever. That there's no way to determine what is causing that fever, especially at this time. You can't dissect or vivisect to be able to see what's causing
They
that
couldn't
fever.
see that she had the coronavirus.
Yeah, exactly. This is the first documented case of coronavirus.
Nick, you dropped your iPad. Do you need to get it since it's broken here?
It's
Nick's throwing things during the broadcast.
No, it was.
But I think her reaction is what is important, because Jesus healed her, and immediately she rose and began to serve him. Jesus has healed us in the same, in a better sense. He's healed us spiritually. And what is our reaction?
Right.
Do we want to just turn around and serve him with our entire life? Do we want to call him Lord like the leper,
Right.
Lord like the centurion, or is it just kind of one of those casual things? Like, oh, thank you, Jesus.
Yeah, she got up and got to work for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we get
Shows-
up and go to
shows
work for
some type
Jesus?
of enthusiasm that she,
Yeah.
whoa, man, the gratefulness that she has for Jesus.
What
Yeah.
about, too, also the immediate nature of it? You can't
Yeah.
argue like, you know, oh, maybe Jesus really didn't do a miracle. She just slowly got better. No, it was, yeah, right there.
Yeah.
And then she gets well. So when evening came, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed. And he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were ill. So the word is getting out already. And now people are coming together. You have a lot of these healing sections in Matthew where large groups of people are healed. And you have all these people coming to many people. And now we even mentioned demon possession here, which we kind of alluded to in the Sermon on the Mount, but now we got more about it. And he cast out the spirits with the word, and he healed all who were ill. In verse 17, this was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. I believe it's from Isaiah 53, verse 4. He took our infirmities and carried away our diseases. So Jesus is fulfilling prophecy while showing his authority over the physical and the spiritual world, which backs up what he just taught and shows how amazing he is. He truly is the Messiah.
And this is, we see it with Luke in Acts. It's very much a historical document. But here, Matthew tells us that he's in Capernaum. And then to narrow that in even more, he's at Peter's house in Capernaum. And there's so many around there that got healed. And so to Matthew's reader, it's if you have any doubts, if you have any questions, go to Capernaum and start talking to people. Because there will be many who were oppressed. There will be many that were healed. All the people who were sick were still around. And if Jesus works like they do in the Green Mile, they would be living for 3
But he heals them and he casts out demons before Curtis digresses into some other movie illustration that we'll have to do damage control of later. But Jesus heals all people, and by doing it, he fulfills prophecy, shows that he's a person with great authority. And it continues. Now, verse 18, when Jesus saw a crowd around him, because there's people around him, he gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. And I love how Jesus does this throughout the Gospels. Anytime there's a whole bunch of attention, let's get out of here. I love it because I'm kind of an introvert. I'm like, okay, the crowd's been here long enough. It's time to go. And Jesus goes, but I think he also has a reason to. What do you think that reason is?
But think about this too. Imagine yourself, being where a crowd of people is actually following you. Not just you're in a crowd of people and you don't like it, right? Or you're amongst a group of people and you don't like it. We're talking about being in a crowd of people and their attention is upon you.
Yeah.
That's the type of thing that Jesus is dealing with.
But I think Jesus...
but I don't think he deliberately says, well, for whatever reason, let's just get out of here. There's a purpose and a reason and a direction that Jesus is going that moves him to the next spot.
I think he wants to test why they're following him.
And I think so too.
Because usually when there's these large crowds, he just healed a bunch of people. He could stay there in Capernaum and be the great healer for all time, and people just bring people to him. But that's not what he's about. He's about spiritual healing and teaching people, about the message of the kingdom. So he kind of shuts down their misplaced enthusiasm periodically. If they're only enthusiastic about what Jesus can do for them in this earth, they're missing it. So
And kind of circling back to the point you made previously, when he told the leper not to go tell anyone, that fervor, that group mob mentality would continue to build, and he'd be rushed to this messiahship prematurely, or maybe even bypass the cross if he doesn't take a step aside.
I mean, because there's great crowds that start with us at the beginning of chapter 5 that are around to hear his teaching. There's great crowds at the end that have heard his teaching, that understand that he's one that teaches with authority. At the beginning of chapter 8, there's a great crowd that had followed him because of his teaching, and now he's doing miracles. Not only is his teaching powerful and authoritative, but what he can do and his miracles are powerful and authoritative. And that brings a whole nother level of following than just the kind of teaching that Jesus is doing.
But this individual comes to him here and wants to follow him, but maybe that has some misplaced ideas. Because you have a scribe, and a scribe, again, we mentioned was an expert on the law, came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go," which, that's a great line. Jesus is about to leave and go someplace else, and this guy says, "Jesus, I'm ready to hop on the team Jesus now and do whatever I need to do to follow you."
Right.
And Jesus makes this statement, The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Do you know what you're getting into is the question.
Is Jesus just tired here?
I don't think so. I
don't
think
think
he's
so.
showing the reality and trying to get people to count the cost.
But notice the two people that he's encountered, you know, have called him Lord, have called him Master, and here this guy is calling him. I don't know if there's any textual significance to this, but there's a shift here in the language that's being used to talk about Jesus. Not only is he a master, but he's a teacher, and now this is being recognized by someone who copies down and records the law. I don't know what exactly that means, but I think it's.
I don't know. I think that this is another example like you have with the rich
Yeah.
young ruler of someone who on the surface seems to be holy and righteous, but when it comes down to it is really not willing to commit to Jesus. So Jesus knows the man's heart.
Sure.
So this man says, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go." But then Jesus makes a statement about what that might entail. He says, "Well, I don't even have a home. Okay, I'm basically homeless. I'm a vagabond. I travel from place to place preaching.
Right.
And so he makes this statement. And another one of the disciples said to him, "Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me," and allowed the dead to bury their own dead. So you have these people ascribed as following him, and another person described as a disciple. I wouldn't talk about maybe it as being the 12 or that idea, but you have two different people coming to him saying, "I'm willing to follow you," but then Jesus kind of squelches their enthusiasm a little bit with a dose of reality.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can tell Christianity's great, it's going to make your life better, it's all kumbaya, unicorns and rainbows, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, it also means sacrificing your will, following God, and doing things that make you uncomfortable.
And I don't know that this is exactly he's saying that, well, I have no home. I think there's an allusion here that's being spoken of. He's saying boxes have holes, right? Things of the earth have things of the birds of the air have nests. They have a place to live on this earth, but the Son of Man has no place to rest his head. I'm not wondering if this is Jesus saying that my home isn't here, and you understand that if you follow me, your home isn't here either. Because then the next statement he makes, this is just theory. The next statement he makes, he says, another of the disciples came to him and said, "Lord, let me go first and bury my father." We already read this, right? And Jesus says to him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own." I'm not wondering if there's something else here that Jesus is alluding to that is trying to make a distinction between those who follow him and those who, how do I say this? What's the word I'm looking for?
Well, there's some that are there. It's kind of they're fringe members
Yes,
versus the commitment
yes.
one, right? But I mean, I think he wants you to really be truly committed.
And I think that's what is.
Are you willing
I don't-
to?
Yeah.
This guy says, "I'll follow you." Jesus goes, "Are you willing to go without a home?"
Right.
This guy says, "I'll follow you." Jesus says, "Are you willing to skip grandma's funeral?" You know what I mean? That
Are
kind
you
of
willing
thing.
to skip grandma's
Well,
funeral?
actually, he says his father.
His
Which,
father.
by the way, random
Which,
Cliff
yeah.
Sabro fact right here. My family's a long line of people who like to argue. And one time I was in a conversation with my grandma about Christianity. And I don't remember how it came up, but she was like trying to check how committed I actually was. She goes, "All right, well, what if I die and there's a funeral?" And I said, "Well, Jesus said let the dead bury their dead." I don't remember how it went after that, but I don't think I could be kind of a snarky 13-year-old. But Jesus says, I think count the cost and prioritize what is really important to you.
And it's that prioritization, because culturally they buried their dead the same day they died,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, because that's what they had to get Jesus into the tomb
Right.
before the Sabbath.
Right.
And so here, when this guy's saying, "Let me first go and bury my father," I don't know if his dad is dead at this point. It's like, kind of, let me wait it out until my dad
Could be.
dies.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
And then once I have my dad dies, once I
Once
I
I
have
retire,
nothing left.
once
Once I
the
have
virus
nothing
is
left.
over, then we
yeah,
can get back to
I'm
it.
really looking forward to doing that at some point in the future.
Right.
I
like
would
it.
really
Yeah.
love to do that in the future. I just don't have time to do it right now.
Instead of he was
Yeah.
just talking a big game and not really willing to
Yeah.
do it. Yeah, I think you're right.
Mm.
I know we initially kind of talked about stopping here. Let's finish this out kind of quickly. This at least this last section here about the storm and everything, because I think it fits here. This whole idea of Jesus with authority. We'll stop at the end of verse 27. So remember, Jesus said, "Let's leave to the other side of the sea." So they get into a boat now, and his disciples followed him. The ones that are actually willing to follow him, follow him.
Yeah.
And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, So if the boat was being covered with waves and Jesus himself was asleep. Now, historically, you're crossing probably a big lake like the Sea of Galilee here, but they did have storms on these lakes, and
Lake
their boats
Tahoe.
aren't that strong. Okay?
Giant lake.
Yeah.
Lake
So, yeah, big lake. And he's crossing it, and there's a storm, and the boat is being covered with the waves, but Jesus isn't concerned about those things. Jesus is asleep. Verse 25, and they came to him and woke him, saying, Save us, Lord, for we are perishing. And he said to them, Why are you afraid, you men of little faith? Remember, we've already talked about the faith of the leper, the faith of the centurion, the faith of all this. And now Jesus says, Why are you worried? Do you lack faith? And he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm. And the men were, here's our word he just finished chapter 7 with. The men were amazed and said, What kind of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? Jesus has power over physical illness, internal sicknesses, spirit world with demons, and now power over nature. He's calming the storm. He is truly amazing. He truly has authority.
It's neat. We just a few weeks ago did a study on anxiety and emotional and mental health with the teens, right at the start of this coronavirus whole shelter-in-place stuff. And they used this story, and it discussed the anxiety that the apostles had, or the disciples had. Excuse me. These were guys that were fishermen.
Yeah.
They knew the lake. They knew how
And it was
things
deadly.
were. And now the storm is so bad, and Jesus is still asleep. But he uses "O you of little faith" in 6:30, and that's the period or the section where Jesus is talking about anxiety, and he's talking about what we need to be focusing on, not necessarily what we're going to eat or what we're going to wear, but focus on the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added to you. And so it's in this section where Jesus is calling back to this anxiety teaching that now they're concerned about their physical well-being, and he's saying, don't be anxious about that.
Yeah, because just like we worry about what we're going to eat, what we're going to drink, and it causes us stress, here we worry, are we going to die? Trust in Jesus to calm the storms of your life. Sermon idea number 63.
Well, not only that, there's two occurrences of this. Chapter 14, the same thing happens. Jesus calls Peter out to come and walk to him, and then he tells him again, "Oh, you of little faith."
Yeah.
Well, didn't you learn from the first time? Obviously not.
Well, didn't he learn from the fact? Do you think they would have learned when he started healing people and casting out demons that he could save them? But
I mean, it's not like we can't say, well, yeah, it's easy to say, well, I wouldn't have done that when it's all laid out for us.
Well, we have it laid out here, and how many times we still doubt, right?
I know.
And how often do we, when we're in the storm, we think it's the absolute worst thing that's going to come?
Yeah.
And they describe it here. Matthew says it's a great storm.
Save us, we're perishing, we're dying.
It's a great storm. But then Jesus steps up, he speaks up, and then how does he describe the peace? Great calm. As great as the storm is, the peace is as great.
You ever seen a
as
glass
storm.
flat lake on
Yeah.
a summer morning? Yeah, that's how I kind of envision what's happening here. It's just automatic. Boom.
And
done.
when you understand that Jesus has true authority or true power, maybe authority is not even the best word for it. How much power does Jesus possess? If you understand he can cure all the illnesses, cast out all the demons, and calm all the storms, why are we afraid? Why don't we just have faith and trust in him?
And then it's also a neat, if you call back to Psalm 89, and there the psalmist mentions that God is the one who controls the sea. And so it's interesting because this question, and we'll pick up again next week, where the disciples marvel at saying, what sort of man is this that even the winds and sea obey him? But if you call back to what the psalmist is writing, he's not a man that the seas and the winds obey him. And then we'll jump ahead in verse 29, a little teaser for next week. The demons also recognize the fact that Jesus is not just this man.
Yeah.
Jesus is the great teacher, the great healer, so powerful, Lord, and could save. Here he says ultimately he's able to save them from their, the storms here of life. And when they see that, they go, who is this man? Verse 27, that even the winds and the sea obey him.
And I just want to back up and kind of jump on what you were saying about, when the storm comes, we think it's the worst of the worst. All of us at some point.
No one knows what I'm going through, right?
Yes, and all of us have been through at times in the storm, but aren't those the times, and at least they are for me, those are the times that are the greatest teachers for me.
Mm-hmm.
When I learn how God wants me to react or respond to something, when I learn what God wants me to do in response to something like, a hardship in my life. God wants me to respond with trusting in him. He doesn't want me to respond with trusting in myself. When we trust in ourselves, we get ourselves into trouble. And I think that throughout this book, Jesus makes that point with the disciples. Don't trust in yourself. Trust in me. I am the Son of God.
And to me, like, at least a good reminder to me is, Jesus has already done all these miracles and everything, and they need to be reminded again to trust. I think we need to look back at what are all the blessings God has done in my life.
Absolutely.
Now, why don't I think He's going to still do it? Well, this time's different. I'm in a storm. I'm going to perish. No, this time's not different.
Yeah, you've only had the worst day of your life so far.
Yeah.
There's going to be worse days in the future.
Right.
But that's what, to your point, Nick, look at what James talks about. Consider it all joy, my brother, when you encounter various trials.
Yeah.
Because that is ultimately how we're going to get the endurance
Right.
in our life, is relying on God to weather that storm, to see the great peace that is to come out.
And not only that, seeing it like God sees it. Because a lot of times we see it from a purely human perspective. We don't see it from a godly perspective.
Jesus was asleep.
But when we see it like God sees it, it becomes a different reality for us. It becomes a different way of dealing with and responding and reacting to things like this. And I think, this is a perfect example. When they're like, Jesus, obviously they trust that Jesus is going to save them, but they don't understand exactly how much power he has.
And
could you imagine? I mean,
we quickly forget how much power he
Yeah,
has.
and I think about this, right? You ever seen Lake Tahoe when it's really, really windy and blowy? The waves are sometimes, as far as I've seen it, 6 foot high. I mean, just massive waves, to the point where people are surfing on the beach in Lake Tahoe with these waves. Just huge. Imagine going from that to flat water.
Yeah.
It's just
to a cool mountain pond or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't even
love that
wrap my
imagery.
mind around what that would look like. Just like
Not
it's,
so calm.
there's
it's like a frame. I just don't even know how to comprehend that.
and doubling back a little bit, there's such encouragement to us, because if the disciples can get this freaked out with Jesus physically with them,
Yes.
it's encouragement, because we also get freaked out even though Jesus is not in the boat.
I'm not strange by feeling that way.
Yeah. It is a normal feeling to feel that anxiety, but we need to call out to Jesus. When that
very
happens.
good, very good. So, kind of to draw it all in, then we've noticed that Jesus is this great figure of authority in the sense that he can back up his teaching with these miraculous events and supernatural abilities. And when life is hard, we should trust in him. Have the faith of the leper. Have the humility of the centurion. Have the reaction to the miracle of the mother-in-law. And really, truthfully, we need to not freak out like the disciples, but trust in Jesus that he can calm those storms of life. So we will stop here tonight. Let me encourage you, though, those of you that are tuning in, we're going to try. I don't know what the schedule is going to be like in the next few weeks. We're looking like things are more like we might be able to get back together soon in person. If you like this discussion format, let us know, because we've been kind of bouncing around the idea of maybe reappropriating some of our Sunday night services in the future. I know probably early on we won't have that, but maybe doing a discussion format like this to help facilitate deeper Bible study. Let me also remind you, Wednesday night at 6 p.m. we will replay this class, and then we'll have our Zoom class at 7. And then we're doing teens after that too as well. Their teen class?
No, we'll just
teens are coming to that. Okay, teens will be coming into the Zoom class and the discussion. If you need the link to that, let us know. We will be emailing it out. If you lose the email, you can go back to your inbox and find the one from last week. It'll work, and the links will also be posted in our Facebook group. Thank you for tuning in. Have a blessed evening.